Okay, chapter 10, part 4. I got cut off because I got an incoming phone call. Forgot to tell someone that I was recording. But anyway, we're right at a good spot to pick our discussion up. And it's this diagram. This corresponds roughly with the one you'll find on page 377. This is one of the big drivers in the chapter. So here's the deal. We've got our marginal revenue product for labor, so basically our demand curve. Don't worry about this diagram yet. Look at this curve. Look at the top one. This is the supply of labor domestic. So this would be the people already in the United States, and here's the labor supply. And you can see that there'd be a wage of W1 and a level of employment. The number of workers that would be employed here would be N1. Now we have immigration, including undocumented immigration, and that pushes the labor supply curve out from I guess it's LST, to LS. Supply curve shifts out. Of course, the increase in supply is going to depress the wage to W2, and it's going to increase the number of workers who get hired to N2. Okay. So the question is, have immigrants taken any jobs away from native born? They have not taken any jobs away from the native born, but what happens is, as a result, but indirectly, maybe you can say that they have, because the increase in labor supply reduces the wage to W2. So they haven't taken away the jobs per se, but they've reduced quantity supplied by native born workers, because at the lower wage W2, only N3 of them want to work instead of N1. So the distance of N1 minus N3 would be the reduction in native employment, not because they lost their jobs, but because the lower market wage discourages some of them from actually working. Total employment, of course, would go up to N2, and the amount of jobs that are taken by the immigrants would be the distance from N3 to N2. Okay. The only exception to that, which is actually talked about on the very next page, I'm not going to draw the diagram, it's really simple, is if we have a minimum wage where we have an excess supply of labor, the increase in immigration cannot drive the wage down because we're at the minimum wage, and therefore any jobs that are taken by immigrants, one for one, will reduce the amount of jobs that are available for native born. That is the only exception. So you'd have to look under very, very strict conditions to be able to make the determination that, in fact, people have lost their jobs. But who is it replacing, or who has been sort of priced out of the market? Low-skilled, blue-collar workers, and they're the ones that really tend to get hurt. Okay, so who wins from immigration? And then we'll talk a little bit about the empirical impact, and then we'll go right to the questions at the end of the chapter. Well, the winners, first off, are going to be consumers, because you saw an increase in the labor supply curve drives wages down, drives prices down, and therefore enables workers' dollars to go further. Okay, consumers win from immigration. Employers win because the decrease in wages as a result of more of a competition on the supply side. The drop in wages increases profits, and that will encourage more investment. Okay? And that's why it's often said that big business really doesn't want to stop undocumented immigration to the United States, because they like the low-cost labor that increases their profits. Okay. Another effect, big winner from immigration that we haven't mentioned yet, is that immigrants are a big source of spending in the United States, a massive source of spending in the United States. So that pushes the aggregate demand curve up, taking a page out of macroeconomics. Okay. One final observation, and I'll talk a little bit about what the empirical studies have to say, and that is, are low-skilled and high-skilled workers, gross complements or substitutes. It's a term you dread. It's a term from way back at the beginning of the semester. It's a term I told you we would come back to. So we're not going to give up on it. And so the question is, if an increase in the amount of rough labor, low-skilled labor, are they complementary with supervisory workers, with middle management, with medium-skilled workers? If the answer is yes, then those other workers benefit from immigration because you need more supervisors to supervise the larger pool of the lower-skilled workers. Okay. Empirical impacts of immigration. In terms of a negative impact, it's strongest on those with less than a high school education. Again, you see the story all the way around here, that it's hitting those with lower skills, depressing wages, or taking them out one for one if we have a binding minimum wage in that particular market. So the less skilled are going to be hurt the most, but the effect in terms of earnings, only about 3.5%. It's not that big a deal, okay? Immigrants tend to go to cities with the best opportunities. So historically, if you looked at immigrant populations, they would be concentrated in a relatively few very large cities. And if you looked at the history, if you go back to early 1900s, where most of the immigration was coming from Europe, you would see a lot of Polish immigrants, Chicago, Italian immigrants, New York, Philadelphia, Jewish immigrants, New York, by and large, Irish immigrants, Boston, okay? And similarly, once we started to get more migration from Asia, California. The southern border, of course, would be southern states, so Florida, Texas, Arizona, and California. Okay. Now, if you look more recently, states you wouldn't think would have large immigrant populations really do because of economic opportunity. So you look at more states in the Midwest. I remember reading an article a few years back that Oklahoma City had a very large Hispanic population, people moving there, again, for economic opportunity. Cities in Vermont, like I said, don't do the stereotypes. People are going where the jobs are, plain and simple. And when times are bad, they go in the other direction. Right? Immigrants come here to work. The economic value of U.S. output is obviously enhanced. And if immigrants' taxes cover the financial burden on state and local governments primarily to provide services, which would be educational, health services, welfare services, then they may in fact be paying their own way and actually help defray the cost of public goods. Are they heavy users of public services? Yes, in the sense that we have high birth rates from immigrants generally, and large demands on public health. Okay. How about undocumented immigrants? They mainly come here to work. Their crime rates generally are low. What you hear about on the news are the exceptions that prove the rule, okay, and deal with keeping people on the other side of the border if they are deported. But that tends to be really the exception and not the common experience. So low crime rates. Undocumented tend to be ineligible for many government programs, and payroll and sales taxes can't be avoided even if you're off the grid in terms of income taxes. So if these people are buying things, they are paying taxes that way. And sometimes you have people who are getting paid and having with Social Security numbers that are fictitious. Money's being paid in the Social Security system, but these people are not able to get credit for the benefit.